Something happened to me that I did not see coming. You might remember, if you've been watching this channel for a while, that I talked recently about going back to work, about the flatness that had been quietly settling into my retirement, and the decision to do something about it. I got a part-time job at a local nonprofit 3 mornings a week, helping older adults navigate public resources. I talked about why I did it, both the emotional reasons and the practical ones, and I talked about what it felt like in the first weeks. What I did not talk about, because it had not fully happened yet when I made that video, is what came after. About 6 weeks into working again, I was walking home one Friday morning in that particular kind of good tired that comes from a morning of genuine effort. And I stopped at the corner of my street and stood there for a moment and thought, this is it. This is what I have been missing for years. And I am not talking about the job. I am talking about something much smaller and much more difficult to name. The feeling of a day that has weight. The sense of being genuinely present in my own life, rather than passing through it comfortably. The particular quality of a morning cup of tea that comes after something real has been done, rather than before the first thing on the list. I have been thinking about how to describe what I found, and I want to try today, because I think it is something that matters for a lot of women at this stage of life. And because I think the way most of us have been taught to look for it sends us in exactly the wrong direction. Part 1. The lie I believed about purpose. For years, when I thought about the question of purpose, which I tried not to think about too often because it made me anxious, I imagined it as something large, a calling, a mission, the thing that would define this chapter of life the way the library had defined the working years, and the way raising Daniel had defined the years before that. I was looking for the singular, significant thing, and because I could not find it, I assumed I had not yet found my purpose, that it was still out there waiting to be discovered, and that once I found it, I would feel the way I was supposed to feel. The problem with this framing is that it treats purpose as a destination you arrive at, rather than a quality of how you are moving. And while you are scanning the horizon for the arrival, you are walking past the thing you are looking for every single day without recognizing it as what it is. Yuki introduced me, in the way she introduces most things, quietly and without fanfare, to the Japanese concept of ikigai. We were on a walk together during one of her visits, and she mentioned it in passing, describing it the way her own mother had described it to her. Not as a grand philosophy, but as something very simple. Ikigai means literally something like reason for being, or the sense that life is worth living. And in Okinawa, where Yuki has family and where the concept originates, it is not a theory about career alignment or a formula for professional fulfillment. It is the quality found in the small, daily things that make you genuinely glad to have woken up. The morning cup of tea made with attention rather than habit. The garden that needed tending and was tended. The conversation that went long because neither person wanted to end it. The grandchild's face seen on a phone call on a Tuesday afternoon. These are not descriptions of purpose in the way I had been taught to think about purpose, but they are exactly what Ikigai describes. I had been so busy scanning for the large thing that I had missed the small things. And the small things were already there, had always been there, and were what I was actually living for, without knowing how to say so. Tell me in the comments, have you ever caught yourself dismissing something that genuinely brings you joy because it did not seem significant enough to count as purpose? I think this is one of the most common ways we make ourselves unnecessarily unhappy, and I am curious whether others recognize the pattern. Part 2, how the job clarified everything. I need to explain the connection between going back to work and finding this particular kind of clarity, because it is not immediately obvious, and it matters for understanding what I am trying to say. Working again did not give me my purpose. It did something more useful than that. It stripped away the comfortable fog that had been making everything hard to see clearly. When every day is more or less the same, when the routines are well established and the demands are manageable, and nothing much is genuinely at stake, it is easy to lose the ability to perceive what actually matters. Everything becomes approximately equivalent in importance because nothing is truly tested against anything else. The things that genuinely bring you alive and the things that are simply pleasant habits start to blur together. The 3 mornings a week of real work that was occasionally difficult and occasionally uncertain, and occasionally required me to figure out something I did not already know how to handle, reintroduced contrast into my days. And contrast is what makes perception possible. You cannot see what matters until it is placed next to something that matters less. And you cannot feel what is genuinely yours until something external requires you to figure out what you would not sacrifice. By the end of the first month of working again, I knew with a clarity I had not had in years exactly which parts of my daily life were genuinely mine and which parts I had simply accumulated by inertia. The morning garden check before I left for work, that was mine. So fully mine that I was unwilling to give it up no matter how tight the morning was. The Tuesday afternoon reading by the window, mine. The evening closing of the kitchen that leaves the house settled and ready for the next day, so thoroughly mine that skipping it would feel like leaving something unfinished in myself. And the things I had been doing that I could let go of without loss also became clear. The commitments I had made out of a vague sense that I should be busier. The habits maintained because I could not quite justify stopping them. These fell away with less resistance than I expected because the contrast had made it obvious what was worth keeping. Before I continue, a quick word. If you enjoy this channel and want to support my work, just look directly below the video player, right next to the subscribe button, and click the button that says Join. That is how you become a Smart Organizer. Smart Organizers members get exclusive videos, a loyalty badge in the comments, and custom channel emojis. I would love to have you there. Part 3, what my purpose actually is, in plain language. I want to be very specific about this because the vague version is not helpful. Margaret found her purpose, and it involves small daily joys. That is true, and it is also useless without the particulars. My purpose, as I understand it now, is this: to tend things. The house, which I tend every day in small ways. The garden, which I tend through the seasons. The relationships that matter to me, which I tend through the calls I make and the invitations I extend, and the attention I give when someone is in the room with me. The people who come to the nonprofit 3 mornings a week, confused and overwhelmed by a system that is difficult to navigate, whom I tend by giving them my full attention and my best capacity to help them find what they need. Tending is the word that unifies all of it. And once I found it, I could see that it had been the through line of my entire adult life. 34 years as a school librarian, tending. The relationship with Robert and the years of tending that a marriage requires, tending. Raising Daniel and watching him become himself, tending. The house, which I have lived in for more than 30 years and which has received my daily attention in ways that have made it genuinely beautiful over time, tending. I am a tender of things. That is not a career or a mission statement or a monumental calling. It is simply what I do, what I have always done, and what I am most fully myself when I am doing. The moment I named it that simply, the anxiety about whether I had a purpose dissolved entirely. I had not been without purpose. I had been looking for a different word for something I already had. Tell me in the comments, if you had to describe your own through line, the thing you have done in some form across the different chapters of your life, what would it be? I find this question genuinely illuminating, and I would love to know what others discover when they sit with it. Part 4, the 4 questions that help me see it. I want to share these because I think they are more useful than most of the advice about finding purpose that I have encountered, which tends to be large and abstract in ways that are difficult to apply to an actual ordinary Tuesday afternoon. The first question is the morning question. What made me glad yesterday? Not what was accomplished or what went well in a professional sense. What made me glad? The moment in the late afternoon when the light was coming through the kitchen window at that particular angle. The conversation with the woman at the nonprofit who laughed for the first time in the hour I'd spent with her. The smell of the garden after rain. These are not accomplishments. They are the texture of a life that is genuinely mine. And the practice of noticing them is the practice of knowing what I am actually for. The second question is the energy question. Which things in my week make me want to do them? And which things do I feel I should do? This distinction is sharper than it sounds. Should is obligation. Want is ikigai. The two can overlap, but when they consistently do not, that is important information about how my time and energy are being allocated relative to what actually matters. The third question is the legacy question, though I want to reframe it slightly from how it is usually asked. Not what do I want to have achieved, but what do I want people to have felt in my presence? When the grandchildren are older and think back on time spent with me, I want them to remember that I was present, that I paid attention to them as the specific people they are, rather than as the general category of grandchildren, that I took them seriously. That is not a goal. It is a way of showing up that I can practice today and every day. And it tells me precisely what I should be doing with my attention. The fourth question is the permission question. What ordinary part of my daily life would make the day feel incomplete if I skipped it? For me, the morning garden check, the tea made properly, the evening kitchen close, the reading. These are the load-bearing walls of my days. The things that hold the structure up. And recognizing them as such gives me both the clarity to protect them and the permission to treat them as genuinely important rather than as pleasant habits that could be sacrificed for something more significant. Please subscribe if you are not yet subscribed. Every week I share what I've learned about living well and maintaining a home and a daily life that genuinely belongs to you at this stage of life. Part 5. What changes when you know? I want to spend the last section on this because I think it is what actually matters practically. Knowing what your purpose is, in the simple and specific sense I have been describing, changes how you say yes and how you say no. When I understand that the morning garden check is a load-bearing element of my days, saying yes to something that would consistently eliminate the garden check in the morning is a different decision than it would be if I thought of the garden as simply a pleasant habit. It is the difference between protecting something essential and making a casual scheduling decision. This applies to the relationships that matter, the friendships I tend through consistent reaching out and genuine attention. These have clarity around them now. I know why I maintain them, and I know what I am protecting when I protect the time for them. The commitments that do not serve anything real, these have become possible to release without guilt, because I can see now what I am making room for. It also changes the quality of the daily, ordinary hours. The afternoon tea that used to feel like a pause in the real activities of the day now feels like the real activity. The evening reading that I used to think of as leisure now feels like tending something essential. Nothing about the activities has changed, only my understanding of what they are for. I think this is what Yuki was pointing toward in her quiet way when she talked about Ikigai over the years. Not a concept to be learned and applied, but a quality to be noticed, something already present in the life you are actually living, rather than something to be added to it from outside. The purpose was there all along. I was just looking for it in a form it was never going to take. What I have now, at 72, is a life that feels genuinely mine in a way that it did not quite feel before, even when it was good. The house is tended, the relationships are tended, the 3 mornings at the nonprofit are tended, the garden, the channel, the daily routines that give the days their shape, all tended. Not perfectly, not without the difficulty that all real tending involves, but with a sense of purpose that is no longer a question I am trying to answer. The question has been answered. The answer is small and ordinary and entirely sufficient. I want to hear from you now. In the comments, tell me, do you know what your purpose is in this specific and daily sense? Not the large version, the actual version. The thing you do in some form across the different chapters of your life that is most fully you. If you know it, tell me. If you are still looking, tell me that too. And tell me what you think it might be. These conversations are among the most meaningful ones on this channel, and I read every single comment. And please subscribe if you're not yet subscribed. Every week I share what I've learned about living well and keeping a home and a daily life that genuinely supports who you are at every stage of this life. I will see you next week.